Well now, let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Father Lambert Greenan. I'm a Dominican priest of the Irish Dominican province, and I was born on the 11th of January 1917 at a place called Newry, County Armagh, in the north of Ireland. I understand that I am to tell the story of my vocation to the priesthood. Incidentally, at the end of this month, on the 29th of September in 2015, I will be 75 years a priest. So, the story of my vocation begins a long way back, but thank God I am blessed with a good memory. My parents had a great influence in my life and my vocation. And one thing I remember was this: when we were four boys, I was the eldest. My father was working in the public service, and every Saturday he would finish at noon, and he'd come down home near our home, and he would say to us, "Come on, boys, let's go to the Dominican church to confession." And he brought us to confession every Saturday. He went in first. I was next because I was the eldest, and the others after me in order of seniority. We went to confession with my father every week, without exception. Now, another thing that had a very big influence in my vocation was this: that in our family we had the family rosary. That is most important, and I cannot overemphasize that. I remember I was a child, a baby, and I'd hear my parents kneel down and say the family rosary each night. Then I grew up gradually, year by year, until eventually I was old enough to take one of the mysteries, and as we say, give out a mystery. How proud I was when it came my turn to give out the mystery, and my brothers in succession. I remember my family brought me to the first Mass of Father Norbert Barry. He was a Dominican priest who had been previously an altar boy in the Dominican Church, St. Catherine's in Newry. And now he was ordained a priest. I was 7 years of age, and he was coming back to celebrate his first Mass. Church was crowded, and after the Mass, we all went up to the altar rails and individually received his blessing. As we were leaving the church, I said to my father, one day I said, I will be a Dominican priest, and I will celebrate my first Mass on that altar, and I will be wearing those same vestments. Well, my parents must have taken this very seriously. I was 7. They never asked me afterwards what I wanted to be when I grew up, because they took it for granted that I had made my decision. Very often I would imitate the priest saying Mass. I'd get a large sheet of the daily paper, cut a hole for my head, put my head through, like the vestment, and celebrate the Mass and get my 2 brothers to serve it. Well, now, I eventually became an altar boy the following year, an altar boy in the Dominican Church, and I became the head altar boy. Head altar boy is very important. I felt that the head altar boy was the one next to the Pope. So in that year, 1933, I entered the Dominican novitiate at a place called Tala, T-A-L-L, T-A-G-H-T. Tala in Irish means the tomb of Maelruin, where St. Maelruin was buried. So I was there in Tala from 1933 until I was ordained in 1940. That was in the middle of my theological studies. I finished my theological studies, and then I did the examination for the lectorate. That's an internal examination in the Dominican order for teaching. I was now qualified for teaching. It was we had a written paper, of course, and then there was an oral examination. The oral examination lasted for 2 hours and a half. 5 professors, and each professor had half an hour. And of course, we had the whole Summa of St. Thomas as the program on which we were going to be examined, together with canon law, scripture, and other things. So I passed the examination, and then I was put immediately to teaching. I was teaching in a house of studies where I myself had studied. I was teaching there for 3 years, and then I was sent to Rome to study canon law, and came back at the end of 1940 with the licentiate. I hadn't time to finish my thesis. I was called home to teach. So I came back and resumed teaching in 1950, January, and continued teaching for 11 years. My principal subject, my professional subject, was canon law, of course, but I taught many other subjects as required from year to year. But my favorite subject was apologetics. I find that very useful here in Alabama. Well, then, after I had finished my teaching career, I was in charge of a retreat house for 2 years. Strange that I should end up my life here in a retreat house. If I were to write my autobiography, I suppose I couldn't title it From Retreat House to Retreat House. But I was there for 2 years. Then I was sent to our house in Dundalk, where I was the superior, for 6 years. And just as I was finishing there, I put on a new roof on the church, new roof on the convent, and had to clear out the convent of woodworm. So I regarded myself as the world's greatest expert in dry rot and woodworm. The nuncio came to me, Monsignor Archbishop McGill. He was a papal nuncio in Ireland. And he came to me, and he told me that my name had been put forward as prospective editor, founder and editor of the English edition of L'Osservatore Romano, which is the Italian newspaper, daily newspaper of the Vatican. I told him I knew nothing at all about editing a paper. Well, he said, it doesn't matter, he said. Go and do it, he said. The first mistake you make will be your last, because you'll be fired. Then I went and told my mother. She lives 13 miles up the road. I said to her, Mommy, I said, I'm going to Rome. And she looked at me. What are you going to Rome for? I said, I'm going to found a newspaper and edit a newspaper. And she said, what do you know about editing a newspaper? I said, Mommy, there's nothing I cannot do. And she said, go where that, says she. You'll disgrace the family. Well, I thought she was correct. I thought I would have been packed home in disgrace after the first week. However, that was not to be. I arrived there in Rome on the 12th of February 1968, We published the first issue on the 1st of February, 1st of April of that year, 1968. Gave a press conference, presenting it. Very amusing press conference it was, but I haven't got time to speak about that now. I wish to speak about something more important. A few months later, on the 29th of July of that year, 1968, there was a press conference publishing Pope VI encyclical Humanae Vitae about contraception. I was at the press conference, and it was a disaster in this sense. One American journalist asked the man presenting it, Monsignor Ferdinando Lambroschini, professor of moral theology at the Lateran University. He said, "Is this teaching infallible?" And he said, "No, but it must be received with the respect due to pronouncements of the Pope, as stated in the Code of Canon Law." That was a disaster. He should have distinguished. He should have said, is this teaching infallible by an infallible definition of the Pope? And it certainly is not. Is it infallible by the ordinary and universal teaching of the Church in matters pertaining to faith and morals? And it most certainly is infallible. The teaching of Humanae Vitae is infallible. When I went back to my office, my secretary, Sister Catherine, an American sister, a dear lady, I'm sure she's in heaven now, she said to me, "Is this infallible teaching?" I said, "Give me a chance to read it first." So I read it. And I said, yes, this is infallible teaching. Infallible teaching by the ordinary and universal magisterium of the Church, magisterium means teaching, in matters pertaining to faith and morals. I wish to emphasize that because many people disregard it and think it is not infallible teaching. This is teaching which cannot be changed and will never be changed. But now I was there. I was editor for quite a while, but the first months after Humanae Vitae came out, I was defending Humanae Vitae article after article by cardinals and bishops and others, theologians. And we knew, see, all hell was let loose. There was terrible opposition. And people thought, so-called theologians thought, that because this man said it wasn't infallible, it could therefore be rejected. And many so-called theologians in this country, in the US, did reject it. 19 of them in DC rejected it. The cardinal suspended them, Cardinal O'Boyle. Well, then I remained on there for 22 years, 3 years over the age limit. And when I was leaving, my superior shook hands and told me, "By the way, we forgot to tell you when you came that this was only a 5-year appointment." He told me that after 22 years. After I left that, I was, in the summertime, I was acting as confessor in St. Mary Major's, and there I met the sisters, some of the sisters of Mother Angelica. I became their confessor and spiritual director in Rome. I came to meet Mother Angelica sometimes when she came to Rome, and then she invited me here with the sisters to EWTN, and I was with her for a month, the month of April 1993. Her purpose in inviting me was to appear on television with her and to present the new catechism of the Catholic Church. But the English translation had been sunk without trace because of inclusive language. So we didn't have the English edition to present. But Mother had me on television with her for 5 weeks, no, for 4 months, 4 weeks, or 5 weeks it was, and we had great fun. I really enjoyed it, and she enjoyed it too, but she was telling me just about 5 minutes beforehand what the subject of our discussion was to be. Then I met the sisters here, the sister servants of the Eternal Word, and they invited me. They were very good to me when I was here in '93, and they invited me here in '97 to help in the drafting of the constitutions of the sisters, which I did. I came for 1 year, and now I am 18 years here. That year never ended. So I regard it as a great good fortune of my life that I ended up here. I'm now 98. My brother is also a Dominican priest, he's 97. But when I landed here like a cat on my feet. So I'm very fortunate to be here in Casa Maria. And I would say this, that with regard to teaching, parents teaching their children the faith, and that's one thing they must do. They must teach by giving the example. They must bring the children to confession. They must bring the children to Mass. And therefore, the father should be bringing the boys, the mother bringing the girls, and they go along to confession every week. That is very important. It's no good to say, go to confession or go to Mass. They must bring the children to Mass every Sunday. My parents came, and they were every time we came to Mass, they received communion. And we grew up that way, having that example before us. That was one of the important things in the formation of a vocation. As to whether you have a vocation, pray about it and think about it, and also the preparation for sacrifice. And remember that other vocations in life are also stepways to heaven, but this is one, if God is calling you, He will indicate to you. I don't know how it was, but I got the idea at 7 years of age. I decided one day I would say Mass on that altar in those vestments, and I did say Mass on that altar wearing those same vestments 16 years later. My prophecy was fulfilled, but it was God who gave the grace.